Since World War I, aces made legends of themselves and their planes as they took part in spectacular aerial duels in the skies. But fighter aircraft paid a price for their speed and maneuverability. With their compact airframes, it was a challenge to stock them with adequate fuel as they trekked deep into enemy territory. But was there a way for fighters to bring their air bases and supplies with them? Could flying aircraft carriers be constructed to deliver an entire fighter force over the epicenter of a combat zone? At the end of World War I, the navies of the world began to recognize the strategic significance of the aircraft carrier. These floating runways allowed a nation to bring a fighter force right to its enemy's doorstep. But fighters at this time lacked the range to penetrate into the heart of enemy territory. Carriers could take them to the coastline, but no farther. But what if aircraft carriers could fly? In World War I, German airships had rained terror upon England in the first strategic bombing raids, causing widespread panic and destruction. The British soon adapted their defenses and developed fighters and ammunition designed to bring down these floating giants in a mass of flames. Alone in enemy territory, these airships were helpless. Between the wars, the Royal and U.S. navies toyed with the idea of converting these airships into flying aircraft carriers. They could, in essence, be modified to carry a small air force with them. The U.S. Navy commissioned the USS Akron and the USS Macon as their first flying carriers. Both these airships were designed to ferry a complement of Curtiss Sparrowhawk biplanes in hangars built within their duraluminum hulls. Launching and recovery of these tiny biplanes was achieved by means of a trapeze mechanism extended from the bottom of the airships. The flying aircraft carrier system proved effective in tests and exercises, but its success was short-lived. Both the Akron and the Macon were destroyed in separate crashes, along with their biplanes, putting an end to the experiments. The development program was terminated. While the Americans toyed with carriers floating in the sky, the Soviets experimented with fixed-wing carriers. Through a project called Zveno, they chain-linked fighters to a large Soviet bomber to create a mighty war machine. Tupolev TB-1s and 3s acted as the mothership, piggybacking between 2 to 5 Polikarpov I-16s. It was a symbiotic relationship. The fighters were not only bodyguards. If their engines were turning on takeoff, they could provide an extra boost, allowing all aircraft to carry a bigger payload. Once airborne, the bombers could in turn carry the fighters to target, or serve as flying fuel pumps, thus increasing fighter range. This Soviet sky carrier saw limited action against the Germans on the Eastern Front early in the next war. In World War II, both the Axis and Allies struggled with how to protect their bomber forces as they ripped their way in and out of enemy territory. Although both sides had excellent fighters, many simply did not have the range to serve as escort fighters. Could sky carriers be the solution? During the Battle of Britain, Germany's escort fighter deficiency became readily apparent. The Bf-109 was agile and built for dogfighting, but its designers had sacrificed its fuel capacity to create that dexterity. Once over the channel, the Bf-109 pilots had to keep as close an eye on their fuel gauges as they did on enemy interceptors. The Germans did have a purpose-built escort, the Bf-110, which had the range and firepower to fulfill its duties. But it had sacrificed speed to create that range. The Bf-110 was at the mercy of Britain's speedier Spitfires and Hurricanes. Although these two aircraft were flawed, could Germany combine their strengths to create a superior escort? German aircraft manufacturers sought to answer that very question. One simple solution was for the Bf-110 with greater fuel reserves to tow a Bf-109 all the way to Britain. Once over enemy airspace, the host aircraft released the Parasite fighter. Free from the tether, the Bf-109 pilot fired up his engine and set about defending the German bomber force from any hostiles. In this instance, the Bf-110 was transformed into a basic skycarrier. The designers at Junkers and the German Research Institute DFS took this concept one step further. They explored the possibility of the host aircraft not only towing, but also controlling a Parasite escort fighter. In DFS's first experiments, a Heinkel HE-46 with a winch and coupling hook built into its tail was to join up with a Gotha GO-150 with a specially designed nose mount. Unlike the Bf-109 and the Bf-110, the marriage of the two aircraft took place in the air. An HE-46 crew member unwound the kite-like coupling hook until it was a safe distance from his aircraft. The GO-150 pilot then approached from the rear and tried to link up his nose mount with the coupling hook, dangling on the end of the cable. It was a tricky maneuver, requiring a patient and adept pilot. With the GO-150 secure, the HE-46 crew member could reel him in. DFS proved that the two planes could be linked up in the air, but how could the host aircraft control the Parasite escort fighter? The plan was for the host aircraft to reel in and operate the Parasite via a control shaft extended between the two planes. The designers at Junkers borrowed the winch and air-to-air coupling mechanism constructed by DFS and inserted it into a host Ju-90, along with a receiving aperture. The Ju-90 was to operate a smaller Focke-Wulf FW-58 via a retractable control shaft built into its nose. Once linked together, the Ju-90 pilot could take over flying for both aircraft. This was how the system worked in theory. It was now up to the pilots to prove the concept worked while airborne. Like in earlier tests, the host Ju-90 took off and extended a kite with coupling mechanism from its tail. The FW-58 pilot then had the challenging task of trying to latch onto the coupling. With the FW-58 secure on the end of the line, the Ju-90 pilot reeled him in close enough to join with the control shaft. Once the shaft engaged, the FW-58 pilot could fly hands-off until they reached their target. German designers had created 3 successful carrier systems that might have extended the range of their fighters to provide cover for their bombers, but none were implemented on a large scale. It was a short-sighted decision. When Germany turned its attention to the Eastern Front, they continued to pay the price for their inaction. In 1943, the war was shifting in favor of the Allies. The Soviets, once on the brink of disaster, were launching their own offensive. Soviet industry was able to assemble tanks, munitions, and aircraft unhindered, as the Germans had not prepared for a long-range strategic bombing campaign. Germany simply did not have enough heavy bombers, and their only purpose-built one, the AG-177, was so untrustworthy as to be nicknamed the Flaming Coffin. In this desperate time, the designers at Junkers came up with one of the most bizarre proposals for a bomber of World War II, the Ju-290Z. This aircraft design was unconventional in 2 senses. First of all, it was a Zwilling or twin, meaning 2 aircrafts were to be joined together at the wing to create one monstrous airplane. In the case of the 290Z, Two Ju-290s were to be merged together to produce a formidable 8-engined aircraft. It was hoped that its additional range and power would enable Germany to strike at the heart of Soviet industry behind the Ural Mountains. The only problem was if Germany launched such a strike, it had no escort fighters with the range and maneuverability to defend the 290Z. It could be obliterated before it even got to target. To solve this dilemma, the designers at Junkers made an even bolder design choice. They intended to marry it with a Parasite fighter, the Me-328. The Me-328 was made largely of wood and was powered by either two pulse jets or a rocket engine, the same engine used in the Messerschmitt Comet. It was specifically built to be a mini escort that was either towed or carried by a bomber to a target. The designers at Junkers built a platform atop the Ju-290Z to cradle the Me-328. Once over enemy territory, the mini escort could take off and deal with any approaching enemy interceptors. Though an impressive concept in theory, this skycarrier was too radical an idea to put into practice. It never went past the planning phase. The Americans too had initially struggled with how to defend their bombers as they penetrated deep into enemy territory. But rather than building a flying aircraft carrier, they used a more conventional solution. Bombing in the daytime, American bombers were an easy target for German fighters and anti-aircraft batteries. Casualties and losses were high. The P-38 Lightning and P-47 Thunderbolt didn't have the range to escort the bombers all the way to target or back, at least not initially. But one aircraft would change everything. The P-51 Mustang, with a large internal fuel supply and drop tanks, would become the ultimate escort fighter of the era. It had the range, firepower, and maneuverability to make it a feared defender of America's bomber force. At the close of the war, military planners looked ahead to the future while trying to learn from the lessons of World War II. America found itself in an arms race with the Soviets, with both sides building long-range bombers wielding atomic weapons. American military planners did not forget how their bomber forces had been shredded by German interceptors in World War II, and they did not want the same fate for their B-29s and B-36s. They also remembered how effective the piston-powered Mustang had been as an escort. But the Air Force was moving into the jet age. They needed a new jet-powered escort to counter any incoming Soviet interceptors. However, speedy jets came at a high price. Jet engines lacked fuel efficiency, and the tiny jet fighters, even with supplemental fuel tanks, wouldn't be able to follow and protect long-range bombers as they ventured into the vast Soviet territory. To deal with the escort fighter dilemma, the USAF resurrected the idea of a flying aircraft carrier. They hoped to carry a fighter force with them, anchored onto the wings or inside the bodies of their B-29 and B-36 bombers. But to do so, they would have to turn to an old foe. Dr. Richard Vogt, the lead aircraft engineer at Germany's Blohm & Voss in World War II, came to the U.S. as part of Operation Paperclip. Known for his ingenious aircraft designs, he came up with an innovative wing coupling system while working at the research lab of the USAF.
The Germans, during the war, had done a considerable amount of work on wingtip towing. What they were doing was, their theory was that you could add anything out on a wingtip of an airplane, and the increase in aspect ratio of the wing gave you sufficient lift to more than counterbalance the increased drag.
In the first experiments with this system, a Douglas C-47 Skytrain was to be coupled with a Culver Q-14 Cadet at the wingtips. The two aircraft would take off separately and then join up at the wings via a ring and lance coupling system. When linked in this way, the Q-14 would still be free to yaw, pitch, and roll on its own. Initial testing took place in August of 1949, but complications soon arose. When the two aircraft came together, wingtip to wingtip, the Q-14 pilot had control problems. So much so that his aircraft ultimately yawed to the right and uncoupled from the C-47. The Q-14 pilot lost control because the two aircraft were influencing each other's lift. The closer they came, the greater the influence and flying instability until the cadet plane uncoupled. Each pilot could adjust their ailerons to attempt to compensate, but in the case of the first test flight, it was not enough.
Some people, the first time they tried it, had no problem whatsoever. Most people, me included, it took a few tries, but pretty soon you got the knack of it, and from then on it was not a problem. We had other people who were outstanding pilots who never, ever succeeded in hooking up.
To minimize influence, in further experiments the aircraft were kept farther apart. The wingtip coupling mechanism was extended by 19 inches to decrease the effect of the wingtip vortex. Though a small change, with the new coupling the joined aircraft could fly together at speeds between 100 and 160 miles per hour, and even make synchronous 50-degree banking turns. Two wingtip programs were given the green light, utilizing bombers and contemporary jet fighters, Project Tiptoe and Project TomTom. Project Tiptoe sought to couple straight-wing F-84s to the wings of a B-29, in much the same manner as the Q-14 and C-47. Republic Aviation headed the project, and testing produced positive results. The B-29 Superfortress was transformed into a flying aircraft carrier, ferrying an F-84 on each wing. While safely coupled, the fighters could switch off their jet engines to conserve fuel. If an enemy aircraft appeared, the pilots could light up their engines again to intercept. Republic next attempted to implement an automatic control system, so pilots were not taxed during these extended flights, but these tests would lead to a tragic end.
They were flying out of the Republic plant on Long Island, and there was to be the first test of the autopilot. Bud Anderson hooked up, could not get his autopilot to engage, so he disengaged from the B-29. John Davis hooked up on the other wing, engaged his autopilot. Immediately, there was a hard over, nose up, rolled over, came down on the wingtip of the B-29, knocked half the wingtip of the B-29 off. That airplane went in with its full crew. John Davis flew around for a while, but couldn't get out, and he was killed on landing. And that was the end of that program.
Project TomTom had a similar grim fate. This program attempted to link a B-36 mothership with two RF-84Fs. In September of 1956, an RF-84F tore away from the wing of a B-36. Though no one was killed, the program was deemed too dangerous and the project cancelled. Wingtip coupling proved too radical a method for linking escort fighters and bombers, but the USAF still had the greater problem of protecting the bomber force. Other, more conventional ways of hauling a fighter aircraft into combat territory were put on the table. The XF-85, or Goblin, built by McDonnell, was a tiny jet-powered escort fighter, designed small enough to fit in the belly of a B-36. It was 15 feet long and had 25-foot retractable wings that closed down to 5 feet and 5 inches when stowed in the bomber. The plane had no landing wheels. Instead, it had a hook designed to catch onto a trapeze platform extended from the B-36. Goblin release and recovery experiments began on the 23rd of August, 1948. Although designed to fit in a B-36, they were just coming off the assembly line and not ready for tests. A B-29 was used as a substitute. The smaller B-29 bomb bay could not fully retract the Goblin, but it could at least test the basic concept of releasing and recovering it. Once needed for combat, the Goblin could be lowered to the exterior of the plane via the trapeze system. A giant mechanical hand released the Goblin, freeing the pilot to fire his engines and speed towards incoming fighters. Once his mission was complete, he could return back to the trapeze and ascend inside the belly of the bomber. However, hooking back onto the trapeze was a risky maneuver, and on the first test flight proved disastrous. The test pilot smashed his canopy against the mechanical hand and was forced to make a crash landing. Though the aircraft was badly damaged, this was not the death of the Goblin. After the Goblin was repaired, the team made a second attempt at testing the carrier system. Again, the release of the aircraft went smoothly, but the big test was still to come. This time, the Goblin pilot had better luck. He hooked onto the trapeze and was retrieved into the safety of the B-29. Overall, the system worked, but not well enough to impress the USAF leadership. The Goblin project was rejected, as the tiny XF-85 would not have been able to match the performance of the contemporary interceptors of its era. As well, docking required pilots with exceptional flying skills. The USAF made one last attempt to utilize bombers as aircraft carriers. It was perhaps the least radical of all other ideas put forth, and might have had the greatest chance of success. The project was known as Ficon, or the Fighter Conveyor Program. The original goal of Ficon was not to convey escort fighters, but rather to ferry a small tactical nuclear bomber over key targets in Soviet territory. The Ficon system allowed an F-84 pilot to make a surgical nuclear strike deep within enemy borders, a mission that would have been otherwise impossible. After dropping his bomb, the pilot returned to the B-36 mothership and hooked onto a trapeze arm in much the same way as the earlier Goblin. A trapeze operator then retracted the upper half of the F-84 inside the bomber, where the pilot was free to roam and recover until needed. Ficon went into service in the mid-1950s, but its nuclear mission was turned on its head.
There ultimately was one squadron of them, but they were not used for protection. What they were used for photo reconnaissance. The B-36 would get fairly close to the bad people, and then they would send off the RF-84 to take pictures and get back up, since he could go pretty fast.
By the late 1950s, the entire system of flying aircraft carriers was abandoned altogether. The advent of air-to-air refueling meant that tiny jet fighters could replenish their fuel supply several times on the way to a target, whether acting as escorts, tactical bombers, or reconnaissance planes. Furthermore, the arrival of ICBMs made high-flying nuclear bombers a thing of the past. With no fleet of bombers to protect, there was no pressing need to develop a way of ferrying escort fighters into battle. From the Akron, to the Ju-290Z, to Tiptoe, to TomTom, to the Goblin, and to Ficon, airborne carriers always appeared promising as a concept, but it was simply an idea that remained in the clouds. One that was often too complex, too dangerous to implement, and ultimately eclipsed by new ideas, new forms of technology.
The P-85 Goblin was the only airplane that ever flew, which was designed from scratch to be operated entirely from another airplane. All other Parasite airplane projects use modifications of existing airplane designs to accomplish the task. The development of the B-36 by the Consolidated Vultee Aircraft Corporation of Fort Worth, Texas, resulted in a requirement for a means to provide fighter protection for the bomber at any distance from the friendly base that far exceeded the range of currently available escort fighter airplanes. During World War II, American bombers such as the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress consolidated B-24 Liberator, and Boeing B-29 Superfortress were protected by the long-range escort fighters such as the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt and North American P-51 Mustang. On April 11, 1941, the Army Air Corps issued a requirement for a strategic bomber that could carry 10,000 pounds of bombs over a distance of 5,000 miles and still return. The cruise speed of the B-36 was to be approximately 240 to 300 miles per hour. That meant that the bombing missions would take place over 30 hours. There was no fighter that could escort the bomber over that distance. The development cost for longer-ranged flights was high, while aerial refueling was still considered risky and the technology difficult. Pilot fatigue had also been a problem during the long fighter escort missions in Europe and the Pacific, giving further impetus to innovative approaches. Due to the inability of contemporary fighters to escort B-36 bombers all the way to their targets, the Army Air Corps initiated Project NX-472, Unconventional Fighter Design Studies, on December 3, 1942. On January 17, 1943, the Chief of the Air Staff at Army Corps Headquarters requested an examination of the concept of drone crash fighters to protect very heavy bombers on very long-range missions. The crash fighters would be powered with ramjets and operated by radio control. The technology demands of the development of crash fighters were intractable. Such remotely operated drones required some means to transmit enough information from the drone to the remote pilot aboard the bomber for him to successfully engage and shoot down enemy fighter airplanes with human pilots on board. By January 1944, the Air Technical Service Command refined the RFP, and, in January 1945, the specifications were further revised for the MX-472 to specify a jet-powered aircraft. In October of 1944, the Army Air Corps expressed interest in the development of a Parasite fighter that could be carried by bombers. This fighter would be available before the B-36 entered service, particularly the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. McDonnell created its Model 27 to keep the Army Air Corps specification. The Model 27 was a single-seat, single-engine jet Parasite fighter. The initial concept for the Model 27 was for the fighter to be carried half-exposed under the B-29, B-35, or B-36. The USAAF rejected this proposal, citing increased drag and hence the reduced range for the composite bomber fighter configuration. In November 1944, the Air Corps then asked McDonnell for a design that could be carried completely inside one of the bomber bays of a North Drop B-35 or consolidated Vultee B-36. In response, McDonnell presented its revised models, 27B, 27C, and 27D. The Boeing B-29 was not large enough to carry the new fighter internally. On January 3, 1945, the War Department authorized the Air Technical Service Command to enter into a contract with McDonnell to develop the Parasite fighter. The development of the Parasite fighter was conducted under the auspices of Project MX-667. The company's Model 27 proposal is completely reworked to meet the new specifications. On March 19, 1945, McDonnell's design team, led by Herman D. Barkery, submitted a revised proposal, the extensively redesigned Model 27D. The smaller aircraft had an egg-shaped fuselage, 3 fork-shaped vertical stabilizers, horizontal stabilizers with a significant cathedral, and 37 degrees swept-back folding wings to allow it to fit into the confines of a bomb bay. The aircraft measured 14 feet 10 inches long. The folding wings spanned 21 feet. Only a limited fuel supply of 112 U.S. gallons was deemed necessary for the specified 30-minute combat endurance. The addition of the requirement that the Parasite fighter fit completely inside the bomb bay of a B-36 demanded a complete redesign of the concept. McDonnell constructed a wooden mock-up of the Model 27E for inspection by representatives of the Air Force and Consolidated Vultee. They also built a mock-up of an entire B-36 bomb bay, complete with the Goblin trapeze installation. On the 9th of October 1945, the USAAF signed a letter of intent covering the engineering development of 2 prototypes, although the contract was not finalized until February of 1947. The definitive Parasite fighter contract, calling for the production of 2 prototype airplanes in a static test article, was approved on February 5, 1947. The McDonnell Model 27E was selected to meet the requirement for the high-altitude Parasite airplane. The Model 27E was redesignated XP85. but by June 1948, it was changed to XF-85 and given the name Goblin. McDonnell had a tradition of naming its aircraft after mythical creatures of the spirit world. Their first Air Force fighter had been called the Moonbat. Their naval fighters were named Phantom, Banshee, and Demon. There were plans to acquire 30 production P-85s, but the USAAF took a cautious approach. If test results from the two prototypes were positive, production orders for more than 100 of the Goblins would be finalized later. During wind tunnel testing at Moffett Field, California, the first prototype XF-85 was accidentally dropped from a crane at the height of 40 feet, causing substantial damage to the forward fuselage, air intake, and lower fuselage. It was later determined that the sky hook latch had been improperly reassembled after the arrival of the Goblin at the wind tunnel facility. XP-85 was disassembled and loaded into a Fairchild C-82 packet to be returned to McDonnell in St. Louis for repairs to its fuselage. The second prototype had to be substituted for the remainder of the wind tunnel tests and the initial flight tests. Following the completion of the wind tunnel tests at Ames, the XF-85 was returned to McDonnell in St. Louis in the early spring of 1948. McDonnell spent 2 months preparing the Goblin for its first flight. It was disassembled for shipment to Muroc Air Force Base on May 17, 1948. This base was selected as the location for the flight tests of the XF-85. By 1948, Muroc Air Force Base had become the primary flight test and research base of the Air Force and the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. As a production Series B-36 was unavailable, all XF-85 flight tests were carried out using a converted EB-29B Superfortress mothership. This mothership had a modified cutaway bomb bay complete with a trapeze, front airflow deflector, and an array of camera equipment and instrumentation. The pilot of the XF-85 Goblins on all 7 flights was Edwin F. Schock. Schock had graduated from the Virginia Polytechnic Institute in 1941. He was commissioned as an ensign in the U.S. Navy in April 1942. He flew 1 tour of duty in F-6F Hellcats with VF-19 aboard the USS Lexington. He shot down 4 Japanese airplanes. His awards included the Navy Cross, Distinguished Flying Cross, and the Air Medal. At the war's end, he was flying Corsairs with the VBF-150 on USS Lake Champlain. Schock took a job with McDonnell as a test pilot. While Monstro was airborne, Ed Schock prepared for the first XF-85 free flight by practicing the approach to Monstro's trapeze in a Lockheed F-80 Shooting Star. A wire representation of the skyhook was installed in the nose of the Shooting Star. A pilot in a second F-80 flew chase on Schock's airplane. A second B-29 flew alongside Monstro to film the operation. Although the Shooting Star and the Goblin had roughly similar performance, the XF-85 would prove to be more challenging to fly. Since the EB-29B, named Monstro, was smaller than the B-36, the XF-85 would be flight tested half exposed. To load the XF-85 into the host plane, a special loading pit was dug into the tarmac at South Base, Murdoch Airfield, where all the flight tests had originated. On July 23, 1948, the XF-85 flew the first of 5 captive flights, designed to test whether the EB-29B and its Parasite fighter could fly mated. The XF-85 was carried in a stowed position, but was sometimes tethered and extended into the airstream with the engine off, for the pilot to gain some feel for the aircraft in flight. The first free flight of the XF-85 occurred on August 23, 1948. Albert Korschel flew the EB-29B at 200 miles per hour for a few minutes after it had reached the launch altitude of 20,000 feet to cool down its engines. Schock started the engine of the XF-85 and ran through the pre-release checklist. While he had established that the systems of the Goblin were functioning properly, he called to Ish to raise the horse collar. Schock toggled the switch to tumble the head of the Goblin's skyhook. The XF-85 rapidly fell away from the trapeze. Schock spent 10 minutes feeling out the controls of the little airplane. He varied its airspeed from 180 to 250 miles per hour. He stabilized the XF-85 in level flight and tested each control in turn. Schock felt that the Goblin's stability and control in roll was excellent. Its stability and control in yaw was not quite as good, but it was still positive. When he attempted a hookup, it became obvious the Goblin was extremely sensitive to the bomber's turbulence, as well as being affected by the air cushion created by the 2 aircraft operating in close proximity. Constant but gentle adjustments of throttle and trim were necessary to overcome the cushioning effect. After 3 attempts to hook onto the trapeze, Schock miscalculated his approach and struck the trapeze so violently that the canopy was smashed and ripped free, and his helmet and mask were torn off. He saved the prototype by making a belly landing on the reinforced skid at the dry lake bed at Merak. After boosting the trim power by 50%, adjusting the aerodynamics, and other modifications, the pilot of the B-29 that was flying chase offered to provide a commentary over the radio on the progress of the Goblin's approach to the trapeze. Schock signaled the trapeze operator to lower the horse collar onto the nose of the XF-85. He shut down the engine and waited a few minutes for it to cool down. Then he signaled to Ish to retract him into the bomb bay. The successful hook-on increased the optimism of the McDonald team at Merak Air Force Base. The report for the flight test stated, "It would appear from this first hook-on that the operation can be performed repeatedly." Schock flew the XF-85 again the following day. His primary objective of the flight was to practice the hook-on procedure. He released the Goblin from the trapeze and maneuvered in the vicinity of the EB-29B for a few minutes. Schock tumbled the head of the skyhook to release the XF-85 for a second flight and hookup. Just 3 minutes later, he engaged the trapeze again. Schock emphasized that the hook-on procedure was not as easy as it had appeared to be after the first hook-on. It required a skilled pilot in favorable conditions to successfully engage the trapeze. During the 5th flight on October 22, 1948, Schock again found it difficult to hook the Goblin onto the bomber trapeze. The Goblin touched down on the skid at 145 miles per hour, trailing another long plume of dust across Rogers Dry Lake. The turbulent air near the trapeze, in conjunction with the added turbulence from the uncovered skyhook well, made the XF-85 too unstable to hook on to the trapeze. With the first prototype's repair completed, it also joined the flight test program, completing captive flights. While in flight, the Goblin was stable, easy to fly, and recoverable from spins, although initial estimates of a 648 mile/hour top speed proved to be optimistic. The first test flights revealed that the turbulence during the approach to the B-29 was significant, leading to the addition of upper and lower fins at the extreme rear fuselage, as well as 2 wingtip fins to compensate for the increased directional instability in docking. All the initial flights had the hook secured in a fixed position, but when the hook was stowed and later raised, the resulting buffeting added to the difficulty in attempting a hookup. To address the problem, small aerodynamic fairings were added to the hook well that reduced the buffeting when the hook was extended and retracted. After repairs to the trapeze, Schott flew the first prototype on the 8th of April 1949, completing a 30-minute free flight test, but after 3 attempts, abandoned his efforts and resorted to another belly landing at Merak. The Boeing EB-29B Superfortress had been flown 49 times and accumulated 77 hours and 5 minutes of flight time over the course of the XF-85 flight test program. Monstro carried the first of the XF-85 16 times and launched it another 6 times. It carried the second on 1 captive flight and launched it just 1 time. The flying career of the second XF-85 had just consisted of 1 captive flight and 1 free flight of 30 minutes duration. No attempt was made to evaluate its speed or altitude capabilities. The highest speed attained by either XF-85 was 362 miles per hour. In spite of the problems encountered with the task of hooking up on the trapeze, Ed Schock was enthusiastic with the flying qualities of the XF-85 and free flight. The pilots flying a Lockheed F-80 chase planes found it difficult to follow the Goblin in a tight turn, but despite McDonald's proposals for improvements to the design of the skyhook and trapeze, the Air Force declined to invest the funds necessary to develop the modified systems. No amount of reworking would be able to provide the Goblin with adequate endurance for its intended mission. The limited combat capability provided by the short range of the XF-85 Goblin was not considered sufficient to warrant the cost of its development into an operationally suitable Parasite fighter. The Air Force abandoned its attempts to develop a specialized escort fighter that fit entirely within the bomb bay of a B-36. The addition of McDonald's fixed fee brought the total cost of the program to $3,210,000. After the conclusion of the XF-85 Goblin test program, Albert Cordial was hired by Bell Aircraft in New York. Ed Schock was killed in the crash of a McDonnell F-2H-3 Banshee in September 1951. Despite the cancellation of the XF-85, the USAF continued to examine the concept of Parasite aircraft as defensive fighters through a series of projects. These included Projects Tiptoe and Projects Ficon and Project TomTom, which involved fighter aircraft attached to a bomber aircraft by their wingtips. Project Ficon, codenamed Fighter Conveyor, emerged as an effective Convair GRB-36D, and Republic RF-84K Thunderflash combined bomber reconnaissance fighter, although the role was changed to that of strategic reconnaissance. Project Ficon drew heavily on data from the abortive XV8 project and closely followed McDonnell's recommendations in designing more refined trapeze. A total of 10 converted B-36s and 25 reconnaissance fighters saw limited service with Strategic Air Command in 1955 to 1956, before they were supplemented by more effective aircraft and satellite systems. After the program's termination, the two XF-85 prototypes were stored before being surplused and relegated to museum display in 1950. Following the cancellation of the program, the second of the XF-85s were transferred to the National Museum of the United States Air Force near Dayton, Ohio on the 23rd of August, 1950, and was one of the first experimental aircraft to be displayed on the new Air Force Museum. For several decades, the aircraft was displayed alongside the museum's Convair B-36. In 2000, the aircraft was moved to the museum's experimental aircraft hangar. Museum staff and visitors objected to this move, believing that the aircraft should be displayed alongside the B-36 to properly represent its original design intentions. XF-85 46-524 was given to the Air Force Exhibit Unit at Norton Air Force Base, California, on December 13, 1950. It was placed on a flatbed truck and served as a mobile display for the Air Force for several years. It was later added to a collection of Air Force airplanes on display at Norton Air Force Base, but the collection was dispersed in the 1960s. The XF-85 that was stationed in Norton Air Force Base was purchased by Talmadge Movieland of the Air Museum and displayed in the Orange County Airport, now John Wayne International, in Santana, California. The museum was owned and operated by Frank Talman and Paul Mantz. In May 1968, a large portion of the Movieland Air collection was auctioned off. The Air Force then reacquired that XF-85 and put it on display at the Strategic Air Command Museum at Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska. The Strategic Air Command Museum has since moved to a new facility between Omaha and Lincoln, Nebraska.
It is a historical discovery worth its weight in gold. A truly important document of German aviation history is uncovered. It is not found in the archives or by any secret military personnel after the war. It happens instead by accident. On an ordinary day for this factory worker, he discovers a sealed canister containing a drawing. It appears to be a blueprint for the design of an aircraft. On closer inspection, the document dates back to the mid-1920s. What it turns out to be are the workings of a deadly state-of-the-art bomber, illegal in Germany at that time. Its origins are inspired by this strangely designed plane. It may look backwards, but the logic behind the design is truly forward in thinking. It is one of the original tail-first, canard-designed planes, and the concept behind it demonstrates Germany's desire to be at aviation's vanguard.
In the NT, again the duck, late 20s, they had this design. Tail first, not really an airliner, but a few seats. The tail-first design would allow you to triumph against the stall. The stall was very much a feared thing. You lose control, you crash. A canard, a tail-first design, can say that if forward tail stalls, nose goes down, pick up speed, airplane stays in the air, all is well. The prototype flew around 1927-28, worked quite well.
It is an unconventional design by an unconventional designer. Heinrich Fokker is hoping to remove one of the pilot's biggest concerns since the birth of aviation, the dreaded stall factor. Thus, the design is catching the attention of aviation enthusiasts from around the world. Innovative as the F-19 may be, it is not without its flaws.
Eventually, it crashed. If you lose control of it at low level, it's deadly. And Mr. Wolf, the Wolf of the Focke-Wulf, he's the one who died in the crash.
With the death of their founder, and with military aircraft strictly forbidden in Germany, those at Focke-Wulf are now at a fork in the road. Do they keep on developing canard technology for peaceful and, most importantly, legal purposes? or do they risk both the company's future and their freedom by turning it into a deadly weapon of force? In an extremely risky decision in the history of the company, the plan for the F-19 dramatically changes. Instead of being the originally planned sports plane, it is now going to be a deadly bomber, capable of causing tremendous havoc over Europe's skies. The man behind this madness is one of Germany's true engineering geniuses, Kurt Tank, who joins Focke-Wulf as a result of a company takeover. Being there every step of the way, he harnesses and perfects this technology into what becomes known as the Model 42. The source of funding for this ambitious project in an economically starved country is still unknown. However, there is one thing for certain. Germany's quest to rule the skies is something neither military defeat nor monetary limitation can stop.
Tail-first design was developed for a number of reasons. If you have a canard configuration, you have a very thin nose because your engine is behind the pilot. You can technically, at least in theory, increase speed with the same amount of power, which is good for combat aircraft. Also, because you have a fairly thin nose, you can improve, to a certain extent, pilot visibility.
When completed, this aircraft, powered by BMW's V12 engines and possessing a maximum speed of 200 miles an hour, is for Germany both her sword and shield. Any potential enemy will think twice about pushing around a Germany possessing an arsenal of aircraft carrying 20 200-pound bombs on board. More importantly, if Germany desires to reclaim her lost territories following the Treaty of Versailles, the Model 42 can put immense fear into both Europe's citizens and industries with its capability of causing enormous destruction. As testing rapidly advances, ironically, the rug is pulled from underneath them by neither pacifists nor neighboring European powers, but by the most militaristic regime in history. As Hitler's Nazi Party comes to power in 1933, the newly installed Chancellor's main interests are in maintaining and consolidating his power. An illegal aircraft project, if discovered, could be the end to his fragile rule. As a result, the project dies alongside German democracy. Although the Model 42's future is ended with the single stroke of a pen, the concept of canard technology lives on. Focke-Wulf obeys the government's decision, but at the same time rapidly develops what is known as short takeoff and landing technology. One of its crown jewels is the FW-61, the world's first fully controllable helicopter. Its creator, Professor Heinrich Focke's, much like his German predecessors, symbolizes that an idea can never be defeated, no matter what obstacles it may face. Had this bomber plane been approved for production on a massive scale, one can only imagine what impact it would have had on the Second World War. It is one of the conflict's greatest what-ifs. In fighting both Britain and the Soviet Union, it might well have tipped the scale in favor of Germany. The Model 42 thus may have resulted in a soaring victory and changed dramatically the outcome of the war in Europe.
I name you hero and wish you good luck and Godspeed to all who fly in this type. Yeah? Thank you very much.
Despite the enthusiasm at Handley Page, the mood in England at this time is anything but cheerful. By 1937, the drums of war are beginning to be heard across the nation. Never has this been more evident than at these factories, where the Harrow is being introduced in an attempt to showcase Britain's military power. Unfortunately, it is technologically years behind the now cancelled Model 42. With $400 million being spent on aviation in a single year, the government assures its citizens that they have nothing to fear with this powerful weapon on their side. However, the question remains as to whether these bombers can stand up to the growing German threat. These fears are finally realized as Britain's cities are repeatedly bombed by the Luftwaffe, causing enormous destruction and loss of life. The Blitz has now focused the world's attention to what the bomber is capable of doing. The nation everyone is looking to is in dire need of a solution to this deadly problem. It may be one of Britain's most unusual designs for a plane. At Miles Aircraft, this prototype, known as the Libellula, marks not only the resurrection of the canard design, but also exemplifies a company truly thinking outside the box.
People were very appreciative of the fact that Miles had this wonderful innovatory streak in them, and that they might come up trumps with something.
During the war in Reading, Berkshire, the factories of Miles Aircraft are working overtime, making a substantial contribution to the nation's war effort. What is capturing the imagination of the company's top designers is the reconstruction of a revolutionary aircraft. A plane that will capture massive attention with a design so futuristic that it is years ahead of its time. Hard at work with their initial sketches by ambitious and intelligent designers, the canard plane is reborn. In this factory, British men and women are side by side, hard at work putting together this complicated design. While their soldiers are fighting on the front lines, these workers have stayed behind. Their job is to maintain the production of wartime equipment on the home front. And a mighty task for them is to construct this unusual plane possessing a tandem wing arrangement, requiring countless hours of labor. Unlike standard aircraft, the Libellula M35 has its wings at different heights and at different lengths. The reason for this is that the lesser wing acts as a forward-mounted stabilizer, thus improving control, especially in regards to landing. With its shorter wingspan and not requiring them to fold, when completed, the M35 is to be used as a carrier-borne naval fighter. Its sister plane, the second of the Libellulas, with an additional engine, is intended strictly for bombing purposes. Its creator, George Miles, says that when completed, the plane will resemble a dragonfly. In just 90 days, the first plane is built, remarkable for its time. Those at Miles Aircraft are determined to see what this plane can do once it is up in the air. Getting the plane ready for flight, engineers are putting the Libellula in position. As the final inspections are being conducted both underneath the plane and in the cockpit, the company, having a huge investment in the aircraft's success, hopes to put it into mass production shortly, pending government approval. Possessing a tricycle landing gear, the intent is to achieve complete stability when landing. At the rear of the wings are the corresponding vertical and horizontal stabilizers and rudders. Once in the air, the plane is able to fly at 160 miles an hour and climb at a rate of 1,100 feet a minute. Its canard features lend the aircraft well to both high and low-speed flight. With all of its advantages, however, the Libellula is not without its drawbacks.
So the Libellula, the problem was to control the aircraft for takeoff and landing. It had two sets of flaps with 5 settings for each set. So you had a potential 10 combinations. This was difficult because getting the right combination was one thing, because every time you changed the combination, it had some effect on the controllability of the aircraft. And it was really impractical.
Complexity becomes its Achilles heel. And despite the optimism from those involved in both the flying and the making of the plane, the military situation at the time dictates that the Libellula must come in for a political landing. In many ways, it is surprising that both versions of the design never go into mass production. However, its fate, similar to that of the Model 42, rests not on the aspiration of its designers, but on external circumstances. Britain, now with the United States and the Soviet Union as allies, is turning the tide against the German war machine. As a result, the demand for the Libellula evaporates. With prospects for the canard design now looking all but dead, miraculously, it once again is resurrected. This time, however, it is not done by any European power. Instead, it is done across the Atlantic Ocean, in America, the birthplace of aviation. Here, the canard design is reincarnated. The United States, referred to by Japanese Admiral Yamamoto as the sleeping giant, has awakened. Having an industrial capacity second to none, geography is the country's greatest asset. A massive labor force working uninterrupted without fear of factories being bombed is Uncle Sam's greatest advantage. And aircraft production is no exception. In terms of quantity, the United States is the undisputed champion. No European nation can even come close to their rate of production. However, while the country leads in quantity, it is quality that one aircraft company aspires to excel at.
But there was definitely a potential there. So Lockheed started to look at what kind of airplane could be designed around a turbine engine for high-performance aircraft.
It is Lockheed who believes it has the jet-powered solution for the fighter. One of its most secret projects of the war is the L133 prototype, which is tested to see if this new technology can be harnessed into something tangible for the United States military. Thus, the canard design, an important component of the project, rises from the ashes. At first, the Army Air Force show interest in the project. The emerging military-industrial complex, however, dictates the final decision, with it becoming a case of quality versus quantity that ultimately determines the project's future.
They looked at it and sort of, well, this is all very interesting, but you have an engine that's a wee bit on the complicated side, and you're producing Hudsons for the Brits, Lightnings for us, you're producing light transport aircraft, and in some cases, like Lightning, for example, your deliveries are good, but may not be quite as good as we would like them to be. And you want to get involved in the design of a new type of engine and a new type of aircraft. Please slow down. Our enthusiasm is not necessarily there.
With war raging on in both Europe and the Pacific, a policy of producing what is known and reliable is enacted. Every second must be accounted for. With the possibility of the model not functioning properly, precious time must not be spent testing the unknown. Thus, the L133 becomes, much like the Model 42 and the Libellula, an aircraft whose potential remained unfulfilled. There is no doubting, however, with its state-of-the-art technology, the development of the L133 would have brought canard technology to a new level. It is the right place, just not the right time for Lockheed. To the employees at Curtiss-Wright and canard enthusiasts, deliverance has arrived with the XV5, known as the Ascender. With the main wings located at the tail end of the fuselage, it is certain to attract attention due to its unique design.
Presenting the Army's new Ascender plane. With its elevator controls in the nose and its motor and propeller in the rear, this push-propelled fighter reverses conventional airplane design. Developed experimentally as the XP55, the new plane gives forward vision for the pilot and a clear path for his gunfire. In action, the darting tail-first ascender seems to fly backwards.
Its origins lie in an Army Air Corps flirtation with unconventional aircraft design. And nothing defines the unconventional like the tail-first plane. Despite a policy of turning out proven aircraft on a massive scale, there is some room for experimenting. Originally intended as a design to be powered by Pratt & Whitney liquid-cooled H engines, it is perhaps the best chance canard technology has of becoming more than just a blueprint or a workable prototype. Mass-scale production is the ultimate goal of its enthusiasts. After extensive testing, it appears that the Ascender is the best hope in achieving this goal. The Air Corps is impressed so far and asks for 3 prototypes to be built. The plane's future, however, comes crashing down with its first prototype. A stalling malfunction results in the first Ascender taking a 16,000-foot nosedive. As the company attempts to fix this problem, competing technology is evolving faster than XP55. In the end, the project is cancelled indefinitely. It is not worth either the government's time or money, to further pursue such a risky endeavor. Despite its name, in the end, the plane does nothing but descend into the depths of aviation history. By 1945, as Japan enters the fourth year in its war against the United States, the sleeping giant that Admiral Yamamoto feared would awake is now on his nation's doorstep. After massive casualties on both sides, American military power is successful in pushing back Japanese forces through both its superior air and sea power. The American mainland remains untouched after Pearl Harbor, with military production skyrocketing. Japan, a nation that seemed invincible in early 1942, is now feeling this incredible American force wreak havoc over its mainland. In particular, Japanese cities and their inhabitants feel the horrors of an air war that does not distinguish between military and civilian targets. American B-29s, leaving from the islands of Guam and Saipan, fly a total of 107 bombing raid missions on Japan's cities in just 1 year. One particular raid that takes place on the night of March the 9th destroys 250,000 homes and burns almost 100,000 citizens to death. In General MacArthur's historical report, he writes that the effect of these raids rocked the nation to its very foundations. With each passing month, the casualties keep escalating, with nearly 3 million people killed. Mass famine is spreading, with an estimated 10 million people suffering from serious malnutrition. Japanese Admiral Matomi Ogaki, writing in his diary on June the 18th, asks, "Does the enemy intend to destroy all of the cities in this country?" General Curtis LeMay, a key architect of this bombing strategy, pledges to bomb and burn them until they quit. The only problem for LeMay is that with a schedule of approximately 16 burn jobs on urban industrial areas every 3 to 4 days, by mid-August, American bombers will run out of cities to destroy. Japanese air forces are proving incapable of preventing this mass destruction of their homeland. A carrier raid in March of 1945 results in 161 out of 193 Japanese aircraft being shot down by American forces. Vice Admiral John S. McCain pledges to hunt down and destroy every damn plane in Japan. Despite the much-feared kamikaze tactics being employed by Japanese pilots, American military leaders are no longer planning the possibility, but the eventuality, of Japan's surrender. The maps being used by both the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the President show that whether it is through a ground force invasion or through the dropping of an atomic bomb, Japan is a nation on the brink of defeat. The only decision being made by the political and military leaders of the United States is which course of action they should embark on in order to achieve the goal of an unconditional surrender. To those Japanese military leaders who are in their last throes, their hope is to develop a highly maneuverable interceptor plane to act as an antidote against American B-29s. The Shinden aircraft, developed by Kyushu, is the only aircraft with a canard designed to be ordered into quantity production during the Second World War. Equipped to hold one pilot and having a wingspan of 36 feet, armed with 4 30mm cannons and a top speed of 466 miles per hour, in addition to its important canard features, the Japanese military is hoping that Shinden holds the answer to solving the problem of the B-29 bomber. Work begins in June of 1944 to develop this plane, whose name translates to Magnificent Lightning. By now, however, time is not something Japan has on its side. Although the first prototype of the Shinden flies on August the 3rd, it is simply too late to prevent a devastating American attack. 3 days after it is tested, the first atomic bomb is dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, the city of Nagasaki is dealt the same blow. With these two bombings, in addition to the Soviet Union declaring war against Japan, the demand of unconditional surrender is met on September the 2nd, 1945, marking the end to war in the Pacific. The story of the Shinden remains one of the greatest what-ifs in Second World War history. Had Japanese production and testing begun earlier, Would this aircraft have been able to stop American bombing plans as hoped? If the jet technology for this aircraft arrived in time, would the Shinden have been to Japan what the Spitfire and Hurricane had been to Britain in its time of need? For it remains an unknown piece of canard history. The canard design, with its origins dating back to the Wright brothers and their first flight of 1903, is a story of aviation constantly having to overcome the barriers and obstacles put in its way. It is a story of emerging and innovative technology locking horns with the politics of its time. Whether it is a result of a new government taking power, the policies of production, or of a country in desperation, canard technology never soars above these barricades in the first half of the 20th century. There is no doubting, however, what canard technology represents in the history of aviation. It symbolizes the innovative spirit, and it symbolizes the proud heritage of aviation. The canard design is to be remembered through its planes and by the people that created them.
From 1963 to 1975, a fleet of lifting bodies operated at NASA's Flight Research Center, now Armstrong Flight Research Center in Edwards, California, showcased the capability of pilots to maneuver and safely land a wingless vehicle. These lifting bodies were specifically designed to validate the concept of returning a wingless vehicle from space and executing an aircraft-like landing at a predetermined site. These pioneering research vehicles, distinguished by their unconventional aerodynamic shapes, included the M2F1, M2F2, M2F3, HL10, X-24A, and the X-24B. The data gathered from the lifting body program significantly contributed to the knowledge base that ultimately facilitated the development of the Space Shuttle program. Unlike conventional aircraft that rely on wings for aerodynamic lift, these lifting bodies derive lift from their unique shapes. Fins and control surfaces were added to enable pilots to stabilize and maneuver the vehicles, effectively controlling their flight paths. With the exception of the M2F1, all of these vehicles were powered by the XLR-11 rocket engine, the same type used in the Bell X-1, which famously achieved supersonic flight, breaking the sound barrier for the first time. The M2F1, serving as a lightweight prototype, was unpowered. The original idea of lifting bodies was conceived around 1957 by Dr. Alfred J. Eggers Jr., then the Assistant Director for Research and Development Analysis and Planning at the Ames Aeronautical Laboratory, now NASA's Ames Research Center in California's Silicon Valley. H. Julian Allen, an engineer at Ames Research Center, concluded that a blunt nose cone shape was optimal for surviving the intense aerodynamic heating encountered during re-entry from space. The collective research efforts of Eggers, Allen, and their team culminated in the design of the M2, a modified half-cone shape characterized by a rounded bottom and a flat top, featuring a blunt, rounded nose and twin tail fins. This innovative configuration, along with subsequent lifting bodies, enabled them to be maneuvered both laterally and longitudinally, facilitating landings on runways rather than relying on ocean splashdowns typical of contemporary ballistic capsules used in programs like Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. In 1962, Flight Research Center Director Paul Bickle greenlit a program aimed at constructing a lightweight, unpowered lifting body to serve as a prototype for testing the wingless concept. Resembling a flying bathtub, this prototype was designated the M2F1. Crafted by sailplane designer Gus Briegleb, the M2F1 featured a plywood shell enveloping a tubular steel frame meticulously assembled at the center. Construction reached completion in 1963. The initial flight trials involved towing the M2F1 aloft using a souped-up Pontiac convertible, reaching speeds of up to 120 miles per hour across Rogers Dry Lake. These early tests yielded sufficient flight data about the M2F1, paving the way for subsequent flights behind a NASA R4D towplane at higher altitudes. The R4D, a Navy designation for the C-47 or civilian DC-3 aircraft, towed the craft to an altitude of 12,000 feet where it was then released to soar freely back to Rogers Dry Lake, marking a significant milestone in the experimental journey of the M2F1 lifting body. NASA research pilot Milt Thompson flew the M2F1 during the first series of tests. During typical glide flights with the M2F1, the aircraft would remain airborne for several minutes, cruising at speeds ranging from 110 to 120 miles per hour. Remarkably, the M2F1 underwent over 400 ground tows and 77 aircraft tow flights before being retired from active service. Today, this significant historical artifact is under the ownership of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. Currently, it's on a long-term loan to NASA Armstrong, where it has undergone meticulous restoration to resemble its flight-worthy condition, allowing future generations to appreciate its pioneering contributions to aerospace research and development. The success achieved through the M2F1 program spurred NASA to embark on the development and construction of 2 heavyweight lifting bodies, drawing from studies conducted at NASA's Ames and Langley research centers. These lifting bodies were the M2F2 and the HL-10, both of which were manufactured by Northrop Corporation. In the nomenclature, the M denotes manned, while the F signifies flight. The HL designation originates from horizontal landing, with the number 10 indicating the 10th lifting body design explored by Langley. Subsequently, the US Air Force also expressed interest in lifting body research, leading to the creation of a third design concept known as the X-24A, fabricated by the Martin Company. This model underwent modifications to become the X-24B, with both configurations actively participating in the joint NASA-Air Force lifting body program at the Flight Research Center. The fundamental flight profile of these heavyweight lifting bodies involved air launching from NASA's modified NB-52B mothership at an altitude of approximately 45,000 feet, marking the commencement of their experimental flight missions. The XLR-11 rocket engine was then ignited and the vehicle accelerated to speeds of up to 1,100 miles per hour and to altitudes of 60,000 to 70,000 feet. After the rocket engine was shut down, the pilots began steep glides towards the Edwards runway. As the pilots initiated the final approach leg, they augmented their rate of descent to accelerate and harness momentum, executing a flare-out maneuver to decelerate their landing speed to approximately 200 miles per hour, mirroring the basic approach pattern and landing speed utilized by today's space shuttles. The inaugural flight of the M2F2, which closely resembled the M2F1, took place on July 12, 1966, with Milt Thompson once again at the controls. By this time, the same B-52 aircraft responsible for air launching the renowned X-15 rocket research craft had been adapted to also accommodate the lifting bodies. The M2F2 was released from the B-52's wing pylon mount at an altitude of 45,000 feet during its maiden glide flight. The M2F2, weighing in at 4,620 pounds without ballast, measured approximately 22 feet in length and boasted a width of about 10 feet. Tragically, on May 10, 1967, during the 16th glide flight, a landing mishap resulted in severe damage to the vehicle and inflicted serious injuries upon the NASA pilot Bruce Peterson. NASA pilots identified lateral control issues as a contributing factor to the crash of the M2F2, despite the presence of a stability augmentation control system. Subsequently, when the M2F2 underwent reconstruction and was rebranded as the M2F3, enhancements were made to rectify these concerns. One notable modification included the addition of a third vertical fin, strategically positioned between the tip fins to enhance control characteristics. The maiden flight of the revamped M2F3 occurred on June 2, 1970, with NASA pilot Bill Danner at the helm. This initial flight was a glide test aimed at assessing the performance changes resulting from the modifications. Notably, the modified vehicle demonstrated significantly improved lateral stability and control attributes compared to its predecessor, the M2F2. Over the course of the subsequent 26 missions, the M2F3 achieved remarkable milestones. It reached a top speed of 1,064 miles per hour, equivalent to Mach 1.6, with Danner piloting a high-speed mission on December 13, 1972. On December the 20th, 1972, during its final flight with NASA pilot John Mank in command, the M2F3 attained its highest altitude of 71,500 feet before concluding its operational tenure. Today, the M2F3 stands proudly on display at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, serving as a testament to its pivotal role in aerospace history and its contributions to the advancement of flight technology. The HL-10, delivered to the Flight Research Center by Northrop in January 1966, took to the skies for its maiden flight approximately 11 months later, on December the 22nd of the same year, piloted by Bruce Peterson prior to his injury in the M2F2 accident. Over the course of its operational tenure, the HL-10 completed 37 flights, setting numerous program records along the way. Peter Hogue piloted the HL-10 to a remarkable speed of 1,228 miles per hour, equivalent to Mach 1.86, marking the fastest speed achieved by any of the lifting bodies. Just 9 days later, NASA's Bill Danner guided the HL-10 to an impressive altitude of 90,303 feet, establishing the highest altitude reached by any of the lifting body aircraft. Furthermore, on May 9, 1969, under the command of pilot John Mank, the HL-10 became the first lifting body to achieve supersonic flight. Featuring a longitudinally curved bottom and a laterally rounded top, the HL-10 sported a distinctive delta planform. In its final configuration, directional control was facilitated by 3 vertical fins, 2 of which were canted outward from the body, accompanied by a tall center fin. A flush canopy blended into the smooth, rounded nose. It was about 21 feet long, with a span of 13.6 feet. Its glide flight weight was 6,473 pounds, and its maximum gross weight was more than 10,000 pounds. The flights of the HL-10 played a significant role in shaping the design decisions for the space shuttles, particularly in the exclusion of air-breathing engines for powered landings. The HL-10 concluded its operational flights on July 17, 1970, marking the end of its remarkable journey. Today, this iconic craft stands proudly on public display at the entrance to NASA Armstrong Flight Research Center, serving as a tangible reminder of its invaluable contributions to aerospace research and development. Built for the Air Force by Martin, the X-24A was a bulbous-shaped aircraft with 3 vertical fins at the rear for directional control. The X-24A boasted a weight of 6,270 pounds without propellants, with dimensions measuring just over 24 feet in length and nearly 14 feet in width. On April 17, 1969, Air Force Major Gerald Gentry piloted the X-24A for its inaugural unpowered glide flight. Gentry also commanded the vehicle during its first powered flight on March 19, 1970. Over the course of its operational lifespan, the X-24A undertook 28 flights, contributing to the validation of the concept that a wingless vehicle could execute unpowered landings akin to the HL-10 program. Decades later, in a cost-saving measure, the X-38 program managers opted to utilize the X-24A design, leveraging its complete aerodynamic database to minimize the need for additional wind tunnel tests that would have been necessary for a completely new design. The X-24A recorded its fastest speed of 1,036 miles per hour, Mach 1.6, with its highest altitude reaching 71,400 feet. Both of these milestones were achieved by NASA research pilot John Mank, who also piloted the craft on its final flight on June 4, 1971. The X-24B's design evolved from a family of potential re-entry shapes proposed by the Air Force Flight Dynamics Laboratory, each with higher lift-to-drag ratios. To reduce the construction costs of a research vehicle, the Air Force opted to return the X-24A to Martin for modifications. These alterations transformed its bulbous shape into a configuration resembling a flying flatiron, featuring a rounded top, flat bottom, and a double delta planform culminating in a pointed nose. John Mank took the helm for the maiden flight of the modified X-24B, piloting its first glide flight on August 1, 1973. He also commanded the vehicle during its inaugural powered mission on November 15, 1973. Notably, among the X-24B's final flights were 2 meticulously executed landings on the main concrete runway at Edwards, showcasing the operational feasibility of precise unpowered re-entry vehicle landings. These pivotal missions, executed by Mank and Air Force Major Mike Love, played a crucial role in shaping the flight procedures for modern space shuttle landings. The X-24B's last powered flight was on September 23, 1975, with Bill Danner at the controls, marking the conclusion of rocket-powered lifting body flights at the Flight Research Center. Interestingly, Danner also piloted the final X-15 rocket plane mission approximately 7 years prior. The X-24B achieved a top speed of 1,164 miles per hour, Mach 1.75, during a flight piloted by Love on October 25, 1974. Its highest altitude reached was 74,100 feet, accomplished by Mank on May 22, 1975. Today, the X-24B stands proudly on public display at the Air Force Museum located at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, serving as a tangible testament to its significant contributions to aerospace research and development. Over the years, scientists and designers across various nations have devoted efforts towards crafting aircraft with the most minimal takeoff and landing requirements. This approach aimed to reduce the demand for expansive landing sites, thereby enhancing operational versatility. However, achieving such benefits posed significant challenges, prompting aircraft manufacturers to seek unconventional technical solutions. Among the pioneering aircraft to successfully demonstrate shortened takeoff and landing capabilities was the Ryan VZ3 Vertiplane. In the 1950s, American company Ryan Aeronautical embarked on the development of innovative aviation technologies aimed at improving these crucial flight characteristics. Leveraging a combination of established and novel technical solutions, the company aimed to produce an experimental aircraft meeting the desired specifications. The underlying technologies of this pilot project held promise for potential application in the creation of practical aircraft in the future. First of all, such a technique could interest the Army. To reduce the takeoff distance or to ensure vertical ascent into the air, different methods and designs of the aircraft can be used. In their new project, the designers at Ryan decided to apply the technology of deflecting the airflow. The wing of the aircraft of the new model was to be equipped with developed flaps of a large size that could have a significant impact on the movement of air, changing its direction and creating additional thrust. To test the original proposal in practice needed the help of a specialized experimental aircraft. The new project was assigned the working corporate designation Ryan Model 92. Following the expressed interest of the US Army in its development, a new designation emerged, VZ3, along with the fitting name Vertiplane. Over time, the military designation of the project was further supplemented with new letters, VZ3RY, under which it gained widespread recognition. The objective of the VT plane project was to construct an experimental aircraft capable of vertical or shortened takeoff and landing. It aimed to practically test original concepts that could significantly simplify the design. The experimental aircraft wasn't intended for payload carriage or weaponization, hence eliminating the necessity for high load capacity or specialized equipment. Only elements directly pertinent to the project's primary objectives were to exhibit comparative complexity. The proposed design for the VZ3 aircraft entailed a high wing configuration with 2 propellers mounted on underwing gondolas and a fixed landing gear. Its fuselage featured a large teardrop-shaped elongation. Notably, the nose and central sections of the fuselage, distinguished by an enlarged cross-section, boasted vertical sides and a horizontal bottom, seamlessly integrated with other surface areas. Additionally, the tail boom sported a tapering truncated cone shape. In the central part of the fuselage, flush with its upper surface, the wing of the original structure was attached. On the tail, it was planned to install a T-shaped tail unit with a small keel sweep and a rectangular stabilizer. The nose of the fuselage accommodated the cockpit for a single pilot. In the first version of the project, the pilot was to enter through a large opening between the roof and the sides of the fuselage. Even in the initial stages of the project, it became apparent that the cabin glazing design would not offer the necessary visibility during takeoff and landing. Consequently, an additional window with glazing was incorporated into the bottom of the nose fairing, enabling the pilot to maintain visual contact with the runway. The primary innovation of the Ryan VZ3 project lay in its unconventional wing design, featuring elaborate mechanization directly influencing the aircraft's key characteristics. The proposal involved installing a rectangular-shaped high-placed wing in the central part of the fuselage. Despite its relatively modest elongation, other design features compensated effectively for this limitation. Notably, the wing boasted a substantial profile thickness. Two small-sized gondolas housing gearboxes and propeller shafts were positioned beneath the wing. These gondolas featured large trapezoid-shaped combs aimed at mitigating airflow overflow and preventing it from exceeding prescribed limits. The experimental aircraft's wing featured sizable retractable flaps, comparable in area to the wing itself. To enhance takeoff and landing performance, these flaps could extend from the wing and tilt backwards, assuming a position close to vertical. Additionally, the wing, flaps and tip ridges formed a box-shaped system designed to significantly influence aerodynamics and effectively redistribute airflow. It was due to the redistribution of the flow and the direction of the air downwards that was supposed to get a shortened or even vertical takeoff. The experimental aircraft received an unusual power plant equipped with two propellers. The Avco Lycoming T53 L1 turboshaft helicopter engine with a power output of 1,000 horsepower was situated in the rear fuselage. Air intake was facilitated through a bottom-mounted intake device and an internal channel of minimal length, while fuel was sourced from built-in tanks. A shaft positioned in front of the engine transmitted power to the central gearbox, which in turn distributed torque to two shafts running parallel to the wing spars. Subsequently, power was transferred to the propellers through a series of gears. Three-bladed propellers were affixed to the shafts emerging from the underwing gondolas, allowing for the gondolas to maintain a minimal size. Their width remained consistent with the pylons on which they were mounted, thereby minimizing obstruction of the plane's surface area. Each propeller boasted a diameter of 2.79 meters, effectively covering nearly the entire frontal projection area of the wing, thereby positively influencing flight performance. The experimental aircraft of this new model was designed to exhibit acceptable controllability across all flight modes. To achieve this, it was equipped with both traditional control surfaces and non-standard mechanisms serving similar purposes. Pitch and yaw control during speed flight modes were intended to be managed by the elevator and rudder respectively, situated on the stabilizer and keel. At low speeds, such devices sharply lost their efficiency, which, in addition to them, there was developed a system of gas rudders connected to the engine. The plane couldn't be completed with ailerons for this reason. The roll control was proposed to be carried out by changing the operating parameters of the two propellers. An increase in the thrust of one of the screws caused the corresponding plane to rise upwards under the action of the increased lift force and thus led to a change in roll. The initial version of the Ryan VZ3 Vertiplane project featured a 3-point chassis with a tailwheel. The primary supports of this chassis comprised 3 tubes of varying lengths with wheels situated beneath the central fuselage section. A tail skid was positioned at the rear. Due to the aircraft's aim for minimal takeoff weight, provisions for retracting the chassis were not included. The dimensions of the first version of the aircraft were as follows: length 8.3 meters, wingspan 7.14 meters, height 3.25 meters. The normal takeoff weight was set at 1,180 kilograms, with the aircraft designed to be operated by a single pilot located in the forward cabin. The restricted takeoff weight constrained fuel capacity, with high speed and extended range not being primary project objectives. Instead, the focus was on achieving favorable takeoff and landing characteristics. The pilot project was completed in 1957, and by early the following year, the first prototype underwent testing. On February the 7th, it was transported to the airport for ground tests, which preceded its inaugural flight. Prior to this flight, extensive ground testing and wind tunnel trials were conducted over the course of nearly a year. The efforts yielded valuable insights into the aircraft's behaviour across various modes of operation and identified areas for necessary improvements. According to the results of ground tests, an experienced aircraft was allowed to fly. The first flight of the experienced Vertiplane took place on January 21, 1959. The use of large flaps, together with the wing forming a box-like structure, gave certain results. In practice, it revealed the possibility of a sharp reduction in takeoff and run. At the same time, it wasn't without its problems. The initial challenges with the 1,000 horsepower engine became apparent early on, as it failed to generate the necessary thrust to take off without a sufficient headwind, resulting in extended run-up requirements. Furthermore, occasional handling issues arose under certain conditions. The primary focus of the test flights was to ascertain the actual performance characteristics during takeoff and landing modes. Evaluation of the aircraft's behaviour in horizontal flight was of secondary importance. Testing revealed that the current configuration still couldn't execute vertical takeoff. Nevertheless, it showed promising potential for reducing run-up and runway requirements, albeit often reliant on favourable headwinds. Throughout the first months of 1959, Ryan Aeronautical and US Army specialists managed only about 24 relatively successful test flights. Unfortunately, during the 21st flight, the experimental VZ3 experienced a mishap resulting in damage. Despite this setback, the decision was made to restore the aircraft and continue testing. However, shortly after the accident and the commencement of repairs, the US military lost interest in the unconventional project and withdrew its participation. This decision was influenced by various factors, leading to a halt in further collaboration on the project. However, the aircraft was still needed by science, because of which, after repair, the prototype was transferred to NASA. Further work was carried out by the Aerospace Agency specialists. The tests were resumed in February 1960, but soon stopped again. During the next descent into the air, there were problems that forced the pilot to leave the car. Fortunately, the aircraft sustained minimal damage and was deemed repairable. This presented an opportunity to implement several new solutions inspired by the breakdowns and subsequent repairs. The prototype wasn't merely restored, it was also reimagined according to an updated project plan. These enhancements were informed by ground and aerodynamic tests, as well as insights gained from the initial test flights. Foremost among the changes was a significant overhaul of the chassis. The design of the main landing gear underwent modifications, and the tail skid was replaced with a fixed nose strut. This adjustment altered the aircraft's stance on the ground and during takeoff runs, requiring it to rest level with a slight nose-down attitude. Refinements to the chassis, aimed at enhancing visibility during takeoff and landing, prompted the removal of glazing from the nose fairing. Furthermore, the cabin underwent a transformation, shedding its existing glazing and roof. Now, only a small visor remained to shield the pilot, with no additional elements of the canopy present. Additionally, a portion of the metal fuselage skin in the nose section was replaced with linen material. Measures were taken to change the aerodynamics of the aircraft. In place of the crutch under the fuselage, an additional comb appeared, which improved the stability along the course. To improve the characteristics of the wing, deviated slats appeared on the plane. Also changed were the size of the flaps. Various modifications were implemented to simplify or enhance specific elements of the aircraft and improve its aerodynamic performance. By the end of 1960, NASA experts once again brought the experienced Ryan Vertiplane to the runway. Inspections of the aircraft continued until 1961, primarily focusing on studying its takeoff and landing characteristics with different wing configurations, controllability in various modes, and other factors. Horizontal flight characteristics were also evaluated multiple times throughout the testing process. Over several stages of testing, interspersed with repairs, a wealth of diverse information was gathered. The prototype VZ3 was subjected to testing at speeds ranging from 6 knots, 11.1 km an hour, to 80 knots, 148.1 km an hour, and demonstrated acceptable performance across this spectrum. Optimal takeoff and landing parameters were achieved within the 20 to 25 knot range, 37 to 46 kilometers an hour. For instance, at speeds of approximately 35 kilometers an hour, the aircraft required 9 to 10 meters of runway, slightly more than its own length, to take off. Maintaining lift at this speed allowed the aircraft to ascend to an altitude of 1.1 kilometers. Early in the testing phase, pilots encountered the phenomenon known as ground effect. At altitudes below 5 meters, air currents reflecting off the ground began to adversely affect the operation of the propellers and wing, reducing their efficiency. Additionally, aircraft stability diminished, potentially resulting in an uncontrolled dive and subsequent crash. Incorrect use of gas rudders exacerbated these risks during such conditions. The negative impact of the underlying surface particularly hampered the implementation of the landing. Nevertheless, recommendations were soon formed on the optimal modes of descent and touching the ground. To avoid loss of control and fall, the pilot on landing, dropping below 15 feet 5 meters, had to withstand speeds of around 20 knots. Maintaining a descent angle of several degrees was crucial during landing. Experimental trials pushed the landing speed to 40 knots, 74 kilometers an hour, and the descent angle to 16 degrees, but such landing modes posed significant risks. From the initial wind tunnel tests, it was evident that the Ryan VZ3 Vertiplane, despite its name, would not be capable of vertical takeoff and landing, a conclusion confirmed during full flight tests. Nevertheless, the project's creators achieved a substantial reduction in runway length, aligning with the original project objectives. Testing of the prototype, revamped according to the updated project specifications, persisted until 1961. Following their conclusion, American experts meticulously analyzed the amassed data, producing numerous reports and scientific works. This comprehensive study spanned several years, shedding light on various aspects of the aircraft's performance. By this time, the prototype had been relegated to storage, with little hope of resuming flights. Indeed, after 1961, the experienced VZ3 never took to the skies again. After all of the required research and scientific work was completed, the car was decommissioned as superfluous. Unlike some other unique examples of aviation technology, the only VT plane was not dismantled for metal. The aircraft was handed over to the Army Aviation Museum, Fort Rucker, Alabama, where it remains to this day. It's worth noting that the prototype Ryan Model 92 VZ3 Vertiplane wasn't the sole platform dedicated to testing and refining innovative concepts aimed at enhancing aircraft takeoff and landing capabilities. Throughout the 1950s, numerous similar-purpose aircraft were developed and tested by several other US aircraft manufacturers. Like the VZ3, these aircraft merit separate examination and review for their contributions to advancing aviation technology in this regard. The Ryan XV5 Vertifan was an experimental jet-powered VSTOL vertical short takeoff and landing aircraft, developed in the 1960s. The United States Army commissioned the Ryan VZ11RY in 1961, later redesignated as the XV5A in 1962. This initiative was part of the Army's exploration of VSTOL capabilities, alongside the Lockheed VZ10 Hummingbird, which was later redesignated as the XV4 in 1962. The XV5 was equipped with two General Electric J85 GE5 turbojets, each providing 2,658 pounds of thrust. Vertical takeoff and landing VTOL capabilities were achieved through the use of General Electric X3535 lift fans integrated into the wings and a smaller fan in the nose. These lift fans were powered by engine exhaust gas. Each wing featured a 62.5-inch diameter lift fan with a hinged cover on the upper wing surface, which could be opened for VTOL operations. The 36-inch nose fan played a role in pitch control, but posed challenges in terms of handling characteristics. The lift fans collectively generated vertical lift of approximately 16,000 pounds, which was nearly 3 times the thrust produced by the turbojets. Yaw control was facilitated by a set of louvered vanes beneath each wing fan, enabling the vectoring of thrust fore and aft. The XV5 Vertifan was a part of the Army's exploration of innovative VS-TOL technologies during the 1960s, showcasing unique lift fan configurations for vertical takeoff and landing. The engine power setting determined the lift from the fans, as fan RPM was determined by the exhaust output from the J85 engines and the load on the fan. Roll control was by differential actuation of the wing fan exit louvers. Aircraft performance was subsonic, with delta wings superficially similar to those on the Douglas A4 Skyhawk. The Vertifan had an unusual intake position above the two-seat side-by-side seating cockpit and a T-tail. The XV5A was painted in army green, while the XV5B had a white NASA colour scheme. Despite its unique design, the lift fans on the XV5 didn't generate the anticipated thrust, and the transition between vertical and horizontal flight proved to be challenging and abrupt. This aircraft marked one of the last crewed endeavours by Ryan, a company that shifted its focus to drone manufacturing in the mid-1960s. The XV5 was part of a diverse array of attempts to create successful vertical takeoff aircraft. However, the lift fan system used in the XV5 was heavy and occupied a considerable internal volume. Only the Hawker Siddeley Harrier remained operational by the turn of the 21st century, along with technology enabling the use of a shaft-driven fan in the Lockheed Martin F-35B. The combination of the J85 engine and lift fan in the XV5 was a precursor to developments that led to the first high bypass ratio engine by General Electric, the TF-39. The lift fans were driven by turbine blades mounted around the fan's periphery, with a mass flow 13 times greater than that of the gas generator, and resulting in a threefold increase in thrust compared to a propelling nozzle. Following the demonstration that large volumes of air could be moved through a lift fan, an 80-inch tip drive fan, turned through 90 degrees and powered by a more potent J79 engine, was constructed to showcase an efficient cruise fan. This concept of a large diameter cruise fan was incorporated into the General Electric TF-39 engine, utilized on the Lockheed CF5 Galaxy. The XV5, while not achieving widespread success, played a role in advancing lift fan technology and contributing to subsequent developments in aircraft propulsion. Two 12,500-pound XV5As were evaluated in late 1966 by 15 test pilots. One was destroyed in a crash during a public flight demonstration on the 27th of April 1965, killing Ryan test pilot Lou Everett. As a result of this accident, the conversion switch was changed to a lift-lock toggle and relocated on the main instrument panel ahead of the collective lever control. The XV5 presented challenges during landing due to various factors. Yaw control relied on altering the angle of the lift fans in opposing directions, but this method proved insufficient for precise low-speed handling. The duct doors further complicated control, causing significant pitch changes even at low speeds. Additionally, the aircraft experienced poor acceleration during standard runway takeoffs. Promotional materials and tests explored the potential of a rescue version equipped with a winch to hoist individuals into a compartment behind the pilots. However, a tragic incident occurred on October 5, 1966, during trials for the rescue aircraft. The second XV5 sustained extensive damage when a suspended horse collar survivor sling was drawn into a wing fan. Despite the fan still functioning well enough for controlled flight, Major David H. Tittle, the pilot, suffered fatal injuries due to the ejection seat propelling him out of the aircraft after it hit the concrete airport surface. Following the accident, the second aircraft was reconstructed as the modified XV5B, and testing continued until 1971. An XV5B is currently on display at the United States Army Aviation Museum in Fort Novosel, Alabama. Despite the cancellation of the program, the ducted fan concept was deemed successful, leading to several proposed follow-up programs. The ducted fans were recognized for their quiet operation, especially for the era, and their ability to operate from standard surface materials without causing damage. This set them apart from other VTOL aircraft, which often require protective mats to prevent ground surface damage from their exhaust, a concern mitigated by the cooler exhaust from ducted fans. In the early years of the Cold War, with military airfields deemed vulnerable to Soviet missile attacks, the concept of underground airports gained traction among Western governments. The rationale was that subterranean bases would offer better protection against enemy assaults and could potentially serve as hangars and launch sites for future stealth aircraft. However, the development of underground airports required the simultaneous creation of high-speed aircraft with vertical takeoff and landing (VTOL) capabilities, as traditional jets rely on runways and open skies for takeoff. One early attempt to build such an aircraft was made by the Canadians. The Avro car emerged from a series of blue sky research projects led by designer Jack Frost, who joined Avro Canada in June 1947 after gaining experience with several British firms. At the time, Frost was particularly focused on jet engine design, seeking ways to enhance the efficiency of the compressor without complicating the simplicity of the turbine engine. During the 1950s, Jack Frost initiated the ambitious Project Y with the aim of developing a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft capitalizing on his newly designed high-power engine. This project represented a forward-looking exploration into VTOL capabilities, aligning with the broader interest in unconventional aircraft designs during the Cold War era. The innovative design featured the redirection of thrust through ducts along a distinctive delta wing, reminiscent of a spade on a playing card. Despite encountering financial constraints and skepticism from the military, Frost persevered in his experimentation. He explored the Quanda effect to enhance the VTOL capabilities, seeking a more practical solution for the project. Although Project Y secured funding from the Canadian Defence Research Board and the US, the Avro car, a project initiated by designer Jack Frost at Avro Canada, faced eventual cancellation due to safety issues encountered during testing. The concept of the aircraft went beyond conventional boundaries, aiming to create a supersonic large-disc fighter with the unique capability of performing vertical takeoffs and landings. The project reflected the era's challenges and aspirations in pushing the limits of aeronautical innovation. To gather flight data on the basic concept while engine development continued, Frost proposed the construction of a smaller proof-of-concept test vehicle in 1958, which he named the Avro car. Simultaneously, the US Army was engaged in various experiments involving smaller vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, envisioning them as flying jeeps. The Army became interested in Avro's concept, and Frost pitched the smaller design as a prototype suitable for the Army's needs and an aerodynamic testbed for the WS606 engine. Initial performance requirements for the Avro car included a 10-minute hover capability in ground effect and a 25-mile range with a 1,000-pound payload. Avro secured a $2 million joint services contract for the construction and testing of 2 Avro cars, designated by the Army as VZ9AV. The Army expressed significant interest in the Avro car program, considering it a potential replacement for helicopters. However, safety concerns during testing eventually led to the cancellation of the project, highlighting the difficulties in realizing unconventional and ambitious aircraft concepts during that period. Additional Air Force funding, approximately $700,000, was allocated to the project from the 606A program. In March 1959, a $1.77 million contract was secured for a second prototype. Despite setbacks, including the cancellation of the Avro CF-105 Arrow program in 1959, the Special Projects Group at Avro Canada continued its work on the Avro car, with renewed involvement from company leadership. The USAF Project Office initially recommended cancelling the WS606A and related work, but an extensive effort led by Jack Frost resulted in the authorization to continue the Flying Saucer programs in May 1959. The Avro car, notable for its disc-shaped design reminiscent of a frisbee, featured an 18-foot diameter and a thickness of 3.5 feet. Supported by a robust equilateral triangle truss, its distinctive element was the 124-blade turbo rotor, centrally positioned and powered by 3 Continental J69 T9 jet engines. The airframe, predominantly constructed from aluminum, had an empty weight of 3,000 pounds. The initial undercarriage included 3 small cast-steering wheels, later replaced by skids during testing. Piloting the Avro car involved a single side-mounted control stick, enabling conventional pitch, roll and yaw control through adjustments in airflow. The attitude thrust control system, positioned outside the main disc, facilitated changes in vertical lift and directional control. To counteract inherent instability during forward flight, a mechanical stability augmentation system was implemented. The Avro car's unique design and control mechanisms aim to address the challenges of achieving vertical takeoffs and landings while ensuring stability during different flight phases. Leveraging the turbo rotor's significant angular momentum, it functioned as a powerful gyroscope, stabilizing the craft. The crew compartment accommodated 2 individuals in separate cockpits integrated into the airframe. Practical testing initially involved a single pilot, with occasional flights featuring an observer in the secondary cockpit. Addressing control intricacies, Avro test pilots honed a nuanced understanding of the craft's sensitive inputs. Chief Development Test Pilot Pitocchi achieved a hands-off flight after resolving control issues, marking a notable advancement. However, despite progress, Avro Test Pilot Peter Cope, USAF Project Pilot Walter J. Hodgson, and NASA's Ames Research Center Chief Test Pilot Fred J. Drinkwater III all emphasized the persistently challenging nature of the Avro car. Drinkwater likened flying it to balancing on a beach ball. The first Avro car, 587055, faced hover issues due to exhaust mixing and limited lift, leading to modifications. The second, 594975, encountered uncontrollable roll and pitch oscillations during tethered hover attempts, attributed to the hubcapping effect, prompting numerous modifications. Despite improvements, nozzle control issues and stability problems persisted. A new design with separate hover and forward flight controls in 1960 demonstrated better control but maintained pitch instability. Further modifications in 1961 improved hover control, allowing speeds up to 100 knots, but pitch instability persisted. A second evaluation in June 1961 revealed control problems and limited flight above critical altitudes. Before modifications could be implemented, funding ran out in March 1961. Despite Frost's proposals for a modified design, the Avro car and related WS606A supersonic VTOL programs were officially cancelled in December 1961 by the US military. The VZ9AV Avro car and its nascent VTOL technology are credited with paving the way for the development of subsequent VTOL-capable aircraft, such as the AV-8B Harrier II, V-22 Osprey, F-22 Raptor, and others currently employed in various missions by the US military. Despite its challenges, the Avro car played a significant role in advancing vertical takeoff and landing technology, contributing to the evolution of modern VTOL aircraft. During the Cold War, the US Army was actively exploring various aviation technologies to gain an edge over the expanding threat posed by the Soviet Union. The VZ4DA, also known as the Model 16, developed at Fort Eustis, was one such result of this era. Edmund R. Doak, the president of Doak Aircraft Company in Torrance, California, had been experimenting with ducted fans and related air-moving concepts since 1935. He proposed a vertical takeoff and landing VTOL aircraft to the US military as early as 1950. Doak successfully convinced the Army Transportation Research and Engineering Command at Fort Eustis that his VTOL aircraft could amalgamate the benefits of a conventional fixed-wing fighter with the helicopter's capacity to take off and land in confined spaces. Recognizing the potential vulnerability of Allied air bases and runways to Soviet first strikes, the Army considered the ability to take off and land in small areas crucial. VTOLs, similar to helicopters, offered the advantage of lingering longer over a target, hovering, and even flying backwards. In essence, the Doak Model 16 appeared to be an ideal utility and observation platform, with the potential to deliver fire to ground targets. On April 10, 1956, the Army awarded Doak a contract for a single research vehicle, initiating the development of the experimental VTOL aircraft. Only one prototype, serial number 569642, would ever be built and tested. The Doak 16's two 5-foot diameter ducted fiberglass fans were located on its wingtips. Positioned vertically for takeoff and landing, they were rotated into a horizontal attitude for normal forward flight, the first time this concept was successfully employed. A rotation speed of 4,800 RPM was required to achieve lift. To maintain a low weight, the fuselage of the Doak 16 was constructed using uncovered welded steel tubing, later covered with molded fiberglass at the nose and thin aluminum sheeting on the aft fuselage. This modification was made when it was discovered that the open frame was hindering forward speed trials. The wings and tail, on the other hand, were made of metal. Edmund R. Doak demonstrated resourcefulness in cost-cutting measures, incorporating the landing gear from a Cessna 182, seats from a North American F-51, and duct actuators from Lockheed T-33 electric flap motors. The two-place tandem cockpit could accommodate a pilot and observer, with standard stick and rudder controls for the pilot. The aircraft's empty weight was 2,400 pounds, and its gross weight was 3,300 pounds. It had a wingspan of 25 feet 7 inches, measured 32 feet in length, and stood 10 feet 1 inch high. By 1958, the Doak 16 had undergone multiple test flights at Torrance Municipal Airport. Its first hovering flight took place on February 25, 1958, and on May 5, 1959, the prototype achieved its first conversion from vertical to horizontal flight, and vice versa. The Doak 16 completed 50 hours of flight testing, including 32 hours on a test stand, 18 hours of tethered hovering, and taxiing. Throughout this process, some undesirable flight characteristics emerged, such as the aircraft's tendency to nose up during the transition from hovering to forward flight, and a short takeoff and landing performance that fell below expectations. But engineers believed these problems were all solvable. Transferred to Edwards Air Force Base in October 1958, the Doak 16 underwent another 50 hours of testing, in the course of which it logged some promising performances. The VTOL's single 825 horsepower Lycoming T53 L1 turbine power plant gave it a maximum speed of 230 miles per hour, a cruising speed of 175 miles per hour, and range of 250 miles. A T-box on the engine transmitted power to the ducted fans through a 4-inch tubular aluminum shaft and two smaller steel shafts. The aircraft's service ceiling was 12,000 feet, and it had a flight endurance of 1 hour. These performance attributes led to its acceptance by the Army in September 1959. Officially designated the VZ4DA, the prototype was then transferred to NASA Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia for further testing. In late 1960, a recession in the aerospace industry prompted Edmund Doak to lay off 90% of his employees. During this period, Douglas Aircraft took over the VZ4DA project by purchasing the patent rights and engineering files. 4 Doak engineers were also hired by Douglas to continue their work at El Segundo. They implemented a larger engine and made structural improvements. However, after 3 more years of testing, the Army withdrew the VZ4DA from active trials. NASA subsequently acquired it in 1973, and it was later transferred to Fort Eustis, where it remained in storage for a time. The demise of the VZ4DA as a viable Army aircraft can be attributed to the evolving preferences within the Army. As the helicopter emerged as the Army's preferred mode of transport during the Doak 16's development, the focus shifted to funding rotorcraft, leading to a reduced emphasis on unconventional prototypes, including the VZ4DA, which were previously under consideration for production. The changing strategic priorities within the Army contributed to the discontinuation of the VZ4DA as an active military aircraft. Conceived during the latter part of World War II, the Miles M57 Aerovan aimed to serve as an economical aircraft for transporting passengers and cargo over short distances, capable of landing and taking off from rugged airstrips. Development of the Aerovan began in early 1944 with the vision of creating a cost-effective, low-powered freighter suitable for both civilian and military applications. George Miles, throughout the Second World War, championed the adoption of such an aircraft in the British military, challenging the prevailing reliance on gliders. After completing the development of the Miles Messenger, Miles's design team recognized the potential of a more powerful and heavier aircraft, approximately double in capacity. This envisioned aircraft could serve as a robust military transport, particularly for operations like the Burma campaign against Imperial Japan and specialized roles such as air ambulance missions. Anticipating post-war demand from civilian operators, Miles foresaw the Aerovan's popularity in the civilian market. However, the War Ministry held a different perspective, delaying the project until the conclusion of hostilities and the Victory in Europe Day celebrations on May 8, 1945. The prototype aircraft was built at the Miles factory in Berkshire, debuting on January 26, 1945. The plane featured a high wing design, a high tail, and large rear clamshell doors. Miles decided that a pair of Blackburn Cirrus major piston engines would power the British-built plane. After its maiden flight, test pilot Tommy Rose gave it rave reviews for its performance. The aircraft was also capable of lifting heavy payloads, something Miles thought the Air Ministry would like. Constructed from plastic-bonded plywood with elements of spruce and metal, the Miles Aerovan was a twin-engined high-wing monoplane. Its design featured a fixed tricycle undercarriage and 3 vertical tail and rudder units, resembling the Miles Messenger in its overall configuration. The wing boasted electrically actuated flaps, a recent innovation allowing adjustment to any angle. Ground steering options included both differential braking and differential operation of the throttles. The Aerovan's forward fuselage had a relatively deep-sided structure, requiring a substantial fin area. The cockpit, situated beneath a large clear perspex canopy, accommodated 2 pilots, while circular windows on either side of the pod-shaped fuselage provided views for passengers. Access to the cabin and cockpit was granted through a starboard side door, with additional amenities like soundproofing often included for enhanced comfort. Known for its lifting prowess, the Aerovan could carry payloads of up to 1 ton, with enough space to accommodate a typical family car, loaded through rear-set clamshell doors. The standard Aerovan was powered by a pair of Blackburn Cirrus major piston engines. Alternative power plants included the de Havilland Gypsy Major and the Lycoming 0435, often necessitating the use of enlarged fins and rudders to cope with the increased power under all circumstances. By swapping the engines, the maximum speed could be increased by up to 20 miles per hour and the rate of climb by up to 50%. Work on the Aerovan was resumed shortly after Victory in Europe Day. While there was immediate demand for the type amongst civilian customers, Miles were not able to keep up with the rate of orders incoming, an outcome which aviation author Don Brown attributed to the Air Ministry's decision to place the project on hold. Diverging from the prototype, the production model of the Aerovan underwent notable changes, including an 18-inch elongation of the fuselage and the adoption of porthole windows in place of rectangular ones. In 1946, full-scale production of the Aerovan commenced, with the majority sold to civilian operators globally. While predominantly a civilian aircraft, some military interest emerged, with Israel and New Zealand among the notable customers. Despite having a license for Aerovan production in France, no such aircraft were ever manufactured in the country. In New Zealand, a single Royal New Zealand Air Force aircraft was adapted for aerial fertilizer spreading, and another for aeromagnetic survey work, though the latter proved unsuccessful. In 1957, a Mark IV model underwent research, with the Hurrell Du Bois high aspect ratio wing becoming known as the Miles HDM 105. Production abruptly halted in late 1947 due to Miles's bankruptcy and subsequent dissolution. Throughout the history of military transport aviation, developers of new projects have consistently aimed to enhance aircraft and helicopter capabilities, including increasing carrying capacity, speed, and range of flight. However, there's also been interest in light or ultralight vehicles, capable of aerial transportation for small loads or passengers, catering to specific needs. Over different periods, numerous projects in this category have emerged. For instance, one of the early endeavours to create a flying jeep for military applications was the development of the XV8 Fleet by the American company Ryan. In response to the diverse transportation needs of the military, including the requirement for aircraft capable of transporting light loads or small groups of personnel, Ryan Aeronautical Company initiated work on its version of such an aircraft in the late 1950s. This project incorporated several innovative ideas aimed at reducing the weight and size of the structure while meeting the necessary flight and carrying capacity requirements. Designated as the XV8, the aircraft project was informally dubbed FLEEP, or Flying Jeep. However, official military documents refer to it as the FWAUV, Flexible Wing Aerial Utility Vehicle, in other words, auxiliary air transport with a flexible wing. Notably, the official designation mirrored the aircraft's goals and fundamental design features, while the informal name encapsulated its operational essence. To achieve the desired characteristics, the prospective aircraft needed to minimize weight. A solution proposed was to utilize a flexible wing, commonly known as a wing rogolo, to reduce the structure's mass. Back in 1948, Francis and Gertrude Rogolo proposed an original wing design suitable for use in light aircraft. It was originally proposed to use a frame of 3 parts of great length, to which it was necessary to fix a square or diamond-shaped canvas. In the future, a new design of such a wing appeared, featuring a different composition of the power elements and the triangular shape of the canvas. The transition from traditional rigid wings to the Rogolo system in the Ryan XV8 project was notable for its simplicity and cost-effectiveness in production. One characteristic feature of this aircraft was its ability to control flight by adjusting the relative position of the wing and the aircraft's centre of gravity. However, the flexible wing also had its limitations, particularly in adverse weather conditions, which could restrict its operation in certain environments. Nevertheless, the Rogolo wing later found application in hang gliders. In the XV8 project, the Rogolo wing was proposed for use, along with several other components serving various purposes. The unique characteristics of the wing, along with existing requirements and new ideas, contributed to the development of a complex aircraft structure capable of transporting people or cargo despite its simplicity. The fuselage of the XV8 aircraft featured a straightforward design with essential components. A rectangular platform served as the basis, equipped with fixtures for cargo installation. Positioned in front of the platform was a small protruding unit, housing the controls and pilot's seat within a nose cone. At the rear of the platform, a frame was provided for mounting the engine. Supporting structures, both in front and behind the platform, were attached to accommodate the unusual design of the wing, with additional components for wing control integrated into these structures. Ryan Aeronautical developed its own version of the flexible wing for use in the XV8 project, contributing to the aircraft's unique design and capabilities. As a basis for this product, 3 metal pipes with a length of 26 feet, about 8 meters, were used. In the nose of the wing, 3 tubes were pivotally connected, which allowed them to move in the same plane. A special mechanism was used to change the relative position of the pipes of the wing frame, which implies the simultaneous movement of the side parts. Near the central part of the wing was placed a set of rigid beams, with the help of which the side pipes could be reduced to the central or conversely diluted to the sides. At maximum extension, the wingspan of the XV8 exceeded 10 meters, while when folded it measured 3 meters. To manage the excessive spreading of the tubes, a control mechanism and several braces were employed. The wing structure comprised 3 pipe beams supporting a quadrangular canvas, forming the wing plane and generating lift. Upon extension, the side pipes created the characteristic wing profile with 2 curved sections at the rear. The leading edge exhibited a sweep of 50 degrees, and the total area, excluding canvas bends, measured 450 square meters. Various materials, including synthetic textiles and films, were tested for the canvas surface. Mounted on the central beam of the Rogallo folding wing were attachments for fuselage truss installation. This pipe was firmly affixed to a swinging arm hinged at the apex of the framework. The front arm of the rocker was linked to a system of rigid rods leading to the control post. Using the appropriate lever, the pilot could adjust the wing's angle of attack to suit the current flight conditions. Located at the rear of the fuselage was an engine mounting frame. The power plant employed was the Continental IO360A piston aircraft engine, delivering 210 horsepower, paired with a two-bladed propeller with a diameter of 2.14 meters. During testing phases, the XV8 Fleet underwent trials with and without engine covers for varying aerodynamic conditions. A substantial fuel tank, contributing to the vehicle's bulkiness, was situated in the central portion of the wing truss. To enhance aerodynamics, a vertical tail was integrated into the design. Mounted on a lightweight beam extending from the engine frame to the fuselage platform, a trapezoidal keel was attached, with its upper section pivotally connected to the central beam of the keel. The beam was designed so that when the angle of attack of the wing changes, the keel remains upright. There were drives to rotate the keel around the vertical axis, which it was proposed to use to control the course. For the transport of goods or passengers in the Project Fleet FWAUV, it was proposed to use the platform in the central part of the fuselage, in close proximity to the centre of gravity. The length of the cargo platform reached 2 meters, the width was slightly less at 1.5 meters. The Ryan XV8 Fleet project aimed at maximising the reduction in size and weight of the aircraft design, and it appears this objective was successfully achieved. The dimensions of the vehicle were kept compact, with a length not exceeding 8 meters, a wingspan of 10 meters when deployed, and a parking height of 4.4 meters. Folding the wing allowed for a reduction in the overall width of the aircraft to about 3 meters while maintaining other dimensions. The aircraft's own weight was a mere 506 kilograms, 1,115 pounds, emphasizing its lightweight construction. For flight preparation, it was suggested to load 68 kilograms, 150 pounds of fuel into the 6.8 kilogram, 15 pound tanks. With fuel and the pilot accounted for, the minimum flight weight of the flying Jeep was estimated at 658 kilograms, 1,450 pounds. This left a payload capacity of 385 kilograms, 850 pounds, resulting in a maximum takeoff weight of 1,043 kilograms, 2,300 pounds. To facilitate takeoff and landing, the aircraft was equipped with a simple non-removable landing gear. The cargo area between the wing trusses could accommodate standard ammunition boxes or weapons, and there was also space for several soldiers with their gear. The landing gear featured light trusses with vertical uprights at the corners of the cargo area, each fitted with a wheel, with telescopic shock absorbers based on springs. In 1961, the development company constructed a full-size model of the XV8 Fleet aircraft and subjected it to wind tunnel testing, during which no significant issues were encountered. This suggests a promising outlook for the project's development and potential deployment. The proposed appearance of the machine allowed to fly, and the combined control of changing the position of the wing and keel could give the desired maneuverability. According to the results of the tests in the wind tunnel, it was recommended to continue the work and begin a full test on the airfield. For use in testing, the first prototype was built with the serial number 6313003. It was built on the original project and fully consistent with the above description. The initial prototype of the Fleet, distinguished by its characteristic appearance, underwent successful runway runs without any issues. However, challenges emerged during attempts to lift the flying Jeep into the air, highlighting both its strengths and weaknesses. To achieve takeoff and landing, a runway length of 170 meters was required, demonstrating the effectiveness of the wing's optimal angle of attack. However, this design feature proved to be a drawback in other flight modes, as swinging the wing and adjusting its angle of attack didn't provide the necessary control. The lack of adequate control in flight could potentially lead to serious consequences, particularly considering the intended military application of the equipment. Consequently, the XV8 project required significant improvements to address these shortcomings. Further analysis identified necessary enhancements, including simplifying the wing's angle of attack control system to allow fixation of the central tube in one of two positions. Additionally, the updated design necessitated the incorporation of a complete tail with a set of control surfaces to improve maneuverability. The revised project aimed to meet these new requirements while preserving the compactness and lightweight characteristics of the aircraft's structure. Consequently, a second prototype, identified by the factory number 6313004, was promptly constructed according to the updated specifications. In accordance with the updated requirements, the second machine Fleet FWAUV received a new version of the power elements of the wing. The three pipes were now connected by a transverse truss consisting of several separate elements. Instead of a complex structure mounted on the fuselage, a set of racks of a simplified design was used. At the same time, the hinge was kept to change the angle of attack of the wing. It was decided to streamline the design of the aircraft further by replacing the four-point chassis with a more simplified configuration, opting for a single central location for the front struts. Additionally, the traditional keel was eliminated, making room for more sophisticated components. The revised tail configuration featured two inclined planes, forming a V-shaped tail on the elongated tail section of the fuselage platform. These planes housed fixed components as well as pivotally mounted parts that could function as rudders. By synchronously or differentially deflecting these rudders, control over roll or yaw could be achieved. Another controlled surface, acting as the elevator, was positioned on the rear edge of the fuselage platform. In the updated Ryan XV8 Fleet project, it was proposed to utilize changes in the wing's angle of attack solely during takeoff and landing. During horizontal flight, the wing would remain fixed in the appropriate position, with control primarily relying on the tail rudders. Prototype number 6313004 underwent testing, affirming the effectiveness of the modifications implemented. The handling significantly improved, reducing the risk of accidents. This advancement allowed for comprehensive flight tests to establish the machine's characteristics. The second prototype demonstrated a maximum flight speed of 96 km an hour, with a cruising speed slightly below 90 km an hour and a flight range of 193 km. With successful test results, the project's future prospects were determined, indicating promising potential for further development. A characteristic feature of the first version of the Project XV8 FWAUV was a maximum possible simplicity of the design, which allowed good weight returns to be achieved. Noticeable refinements of the device necessary to increase manageability and reduce the likelihood of an accident led to some increase in its own weight and a corresponding decrease in other parameters. In conclusion, despite its initial promise, the Ryan XV8 Fleet project didn't meet the expectations of the potential military customer due to shortcomings in controllability and performance. The first version lacked adequate controllability despite its advantages in size and cargo capacity, while the second version sacrificed certain parameters in favor of improved controllability. Recognizing the limitations of the existing design, further development of the XV8 project was deemed impractical, leading to its closure. However, the flexible wing used in the project showed great promise and potential for various applications. Despite its simplicity, the Rogallo wing design proved to be of significant interest and paved the way for advancements in ultralight aviation. Although the XV8 project didn't achieve tangible results in military re-equipment, it played a crucial role in advancing the understanding and development of flexible wing technology, contributing to future innovations in aviation.